Hello, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Hope you're all safe, sound, and healthy. And since my last podcast, in which I was trying to talk about how we should use common sense when we look at everyday life and everyday things, again, let's this time focus on pictures because I feel that we haven't sort of gone deeply into that. Because, as I said, common sense may be the last thing that's actually common here. So we need to try to understand a lot of things here. Pictures, statues, three-dimensional animate objects and all, right? These are what the traditions of the prophet revolve around, right? When we say that it is not permissible to hang animate object pictures on the wall, and when it's not permissible to have statues, and when it's not permissible to display photographs and all, right? Okay, as I said before, that the prophet basically said that anything that can sort of invoke the displeasure of God, in the sense that you would try to um, something that can mimic, you can say, uh, partnership with Allah. In other words, okay, so that is what is not allowed, right? That is what is prohibited. So they say it's okay to put up sceneries, it's okay to put up inanimate objects, pictures of inanimate objects. That's okay on the walls, right? First of all, again, I would say that remember, at the end of the day, all your actions are judged by intentions. But yes, as I said even before, there are certain things that we need to avoid. For example, as I said, those things that are so obviously used for idol worship, that is obviously a big no. There is no confusion there. There should be no confusion there, right? Now let's try to understand more deeply, um, the ahadith, because the problem is that even in modern day, especially in the Middle East, and these are people whose language the Quran came down in, and whose language the traditions of the Prophet are written in, and that they were said and they were recorded. So they are, they have been drawing a distinction, because as I said, Islam is all about common sense, and it's all about actions are judged by intentions. Everything is intentions in Islam, right? So they have also tried to, lay this distinction between what the traditions of the Prophet really were about and what we are on about when we're talking about, for example, photography, right? Now, as I said before, when you take pictures or when you make sketches for record purposes, for example, if you're working, with the police. Now, before there was photography, the only way you could try to identify a person was to be able to draw a sketch of that person, right? So, look at the purpose behind sketching. Look at the purpose behind drawing here. You're drawing an animate object, fine. You're drawing a human being, fine. You're drawing a portrait of a human being, but why? So that you can identify him, so that his picture can be shared with other police stations, and it can be shared on the streets if he's a wanted suspect, for example, so that he can be found, right? It can also be for a missing person, right? How can you find a missing person if you don't know what that person looks like? Common sense, please, okay? So when you are a sketch artist, working with the police or working in medicine or working in the legal field, working in any field that requires recording, then there is really nothing wrong with what you're doing when you're painting or when you're drawing or when you're sketching. Similarly, photography, as I've said before, originally the whole purpose of photography was to be able to take a clear reflection, a clear image of anything or person, so that it can be kept in the record, because sketching too can only go so far. Yes, there are painters that are blessed with the talent to draw lifelike sketches, and maybe that is why that lifelike sketching of animate objects is probably the main purpose here, why it is not liked or not permitted in Islam that you should show it in display, right? So, for example, as I said, that there's a saying that, on the day of judgment, in hell, there will be this neck with two eyes that could see and two tongues, or maybe a tongue or something, and that it would come at the person and say that I've come for three types of people. And one of those people mentioned are those that drew images, right? But again, remember, who drew images for what purpose? Because again, if you look at the other hadith, it's basically about how uh, the the whole question was that God says that, and that He will ask you to blow life or blow soul into that picture or into that image that you have created, and that you cannot do it. So you're invoking the displeasure of God because you're trying to mimic God, right? That God has created a human being, for example, in you, when you're trying to make a lifelike image or portrait or sketch or painting or picture of that human being, it's like you're mimicking God. Okay? Now, again, please, let's keep in mind, actions are judged by intentions. If you're not drawing for that purpose, but you're drawing again in order to help somebody find somebody, or in order to help keep a record, or in order to, be able to archive something for a particular purpose, then that is not what God is talking about. That is not what the Prophet is talking about, okay? There is also this tradition, obviously, where Hazrat Aisha had hung this really beautiful wooden, uh, well, in today's days, I think we tend to call them wall carpets, isn't it? I mean, so she had hung that sort of a thing on her door while the Prophet was out traveling. And then when he came back, he saw it, and then he ripped it apart and said that this is the worst thing that you could do, hanging an image, on the door like this. And so she cut it up and made cushion covers out of it. So apparently, those images were not okay being hung up on the door, like a wall carpet, for example, but it was okay to use that same fabric, that same woolen type fabric, with those same images as pillow covers. You see the difference here, right? You see what's happening here. What's happening here is basically, if you have a life size, or any sized, I mean, hanging, or display of a picture, an image, of particularly an animate object, right? It is as good as mimicking idol worshipping. That's, in other words, that's the best I can put it, the simplest way I can put it, right? Because it's like, remember, this is how idol worshipping basically began. It began with people having lifelike images, you know, of human beings, for example, made larger than life, and then transformed, or any other sort of living thing, or living being, or animals, and then suddenly they became, the center of worship, and they became idolized, in other words, right? So it's very similar to hanging a portrait of somebody you idolize on your wall. Let's put it this way, okay? And then suddenly that person becomes more than just, uh, just more than a picture for you. It becomes your idol, right? That that is what you need to avoid. So, I mean, although I'm trying to talk about all of this, that by no means means that I have pictures, or I actually don't. I don't have pictures on my walls. Okay, we don't generally tend to display pictures on our walls. We do have, again, different handicrafts on our walls, and not even in all the walls. It's just in one room, and that is the living room, where guests seldom come, right? But we don't tend to display our family pictures, to be honest. We don't tend to display any pictures. as it is. The few paintings or the few handicraft things that we have are mainly of inanimate objects, but some are what you might refer to as um, animate objects, I guess, because they're birds. Now, here's where the confusion begins because now people get really confused. They're like, okay, so you have birds and butterflies. Are you allowed to draw birds and butterflies or not? Because on one side you're saying you cannot draw anything that's animate or anything that's, and then you go further and say you're not allowed to draw or make images or decoration pieces or art pieces out of any living thing. But then you're saying, no, it's okay to make it of trees and plants and mountains. But as we know, they have life too, right? So I guess here the distinction then goes further down to no, it's not just about life, it's about animate and inanimate objects. Okay. So then it means all animate objects, all insects, including butterflies, birds, animals, everything is out of the picture. Okay. But you see, again, what I'm trying to say is if this thing does not sit well with you, I would advise that you remove everything that you have. Okay? Because if it doesn't sit well with you, if you're beginning to get worried that that the tiny tiny decoration pieces that you have, that may be of a dog, or it may be of a cat, it may be of a cow, it may be of it may be pictures of a village life, not pictures, sorry, it may be a whole wood carving set, a handicraft set of the village life, or it may be a stork, smelling flowers. It may be anything. And now you're already beginning to panic that, okay, these are just decoration pieces. I never even looked twice at them. But apparently they're supposed to be, invoking the wrath of God. So then, by all means, please remove them for your own peace of mind. But again, I will again try to remind you that actions are judged by intentions. How you see things. Again, here's another. It's not just the nation of Hazrat Nuh. They you could say these are one of the oldest nations that began with lifelike pictures and then worshipping them and all, because as we know, even in Hinduism and Buddhism, they tend to sort of revere the dead to the point of worshipping them, right? Which obviously is shirk in Islam. So they tend to hang pictures of their dead relatives, and then they go and then they pray to them or for them. One never really knows if you're actually praying to them or for them, but basically they're paying their respects to them and all. And that is literally akin to idol worshipping, and it's akin to worshipping the dead, and it's akin to committing shirk, right? So for that purpose, if it is expected that we should avoid hanging pictures of family members on the walls, absolutely understandable. To be honest, I personally do not even see the reason why one would want to hang family pictures on the walls, but people do tend to do that. But as I said, we don't, because we never felt inclined towards it. To be honest, it never was a very religious thing, as much as it was just that we were never inclined towards hanging pictures of ourselves on walls. Um, but yes, as I said, because the prophet did say that, do not mimic the traditions of civilizations before you, that can lead to religious, I mean, this is a religious thing for example, for the Hindus and for the Buddhists and all, that they tend to, put pictures of dead family members or ancestors, and they tend to, give them that reverence that one would give, for worshipping. So yes, it is better to avoid displaying pictures of family members like that on the walls. Okay. But then, at the same time, if you think that putting up calligraphy of Quranic verses or hadiths and all on the walls is like a very good idea, to be honest, that's not a very good idea either. Now, and here's where it kind of becomes a bit self-contradictory, because on one side we're like, okay, so we can't put decoration pieces of animate objects because that is that invokes God's displeasure. But then We're just treating them as decorations, but still, because it can be otherwise, so it should be avoided. But on the other hand, putting up, you know, calligraphy, you know, or should I say, putting up calligraphic verses of the Quran or ahadith on the walls, and, treating them also as decoration would be considered again not liked. That could also invoke God's displeasure, because the Quran is meant to be read, the ahadiths are meant to be read, they're meant to be read, practiced, understood, right? But they're not meant to be displayed there on the walls for decoration purposes. If they're displayed there on the walls, as Mufti Mank says, at least have the courtesy to read them then every day. Every time you pass by them, read them, because they're only effective if you read them. And if you're just putting them up as decoration, you're kind of disrespecting them, right? So I kind of agree with that too. I do. I understand the point there. So, as I said, you see, it's all about intention. Everything is about intention. Everything is about the meaning behind what you're doing, the purpose behind what you're doing. Okay. Um, I personally, as I said before, if people are using certain statues or masks for religious reasons, then it is always best you do not have them, right? Or at least you do not display them, even if you have them. If people, uh, if um, if you have objects that are, hung on the wall like life-sized images, then that is obviously a great no. Okay. When it comes to photography, and when it comes to, these kind of um, decorative art, then again, as I said, the muftis and the scholars in especially the Middle Eastern part of the world, they have tried to clarify the distinction between them, saying that, listen, photography is essentially for record keeping, right? But you see, that's exactly what I'm also saying. Sketching was also essentially for record keeping. Okay. When you're learning to draw uh, animate and inanimate objects, the reason you're learning to draw them to perfection is so that you should be able to give them the you should be able to copy it as close as possible to its original form, right? So that whoever sees it can recognize what it is. Because again, as I said, these are all basically to preserve memories. The whole intents and purposes of all these art forms were basically to preserve memories, okay? Be it sketching, be it photography, be it videography. What you are using it for, or what you are making it for, that depends on you, right? That is what I think makes or breaks the deal here, if you understand what I mean. So, yeah, I think the popular opinion, which we all accept, which is something I said in my last podcast as well, is um, avoid praying in that room where you have these decoration pieces that can create doubts in your mind. Okay, so if you have these decoration pieces and you don't know if they're controversial or not, because there's always this debate going on, so you know um, pray in rooms that don't have things hanging on the wall that can be controversial, right? And because you're basically hanging things on the wall purely for decoration purposes, they essentially, again, as I said, God is all about common sense and practicality. It shouldn't matter. But if you still feel uncomfortable, I would advise that you start removing those items from the wall. That's all I can say. That's the best I can do, okay, is advise that anything that begins to make you uncomfortable, and because there's a controversy surrounding it, and because, on one side you have the core foundation of Islam, which says everything you do you will be judged based on your intention and your purpose, right? And then at the same time, you're thinking that, okay, this was never my intention, this is never my purpose, but I'm going to be punished for it anyway. So you see, this in itself creates a controversy, right? So as I said, if you still have a problem with it, just remove whatever wall hangings you have that you think can be controversial, right? I mean, I think the highest point of controversy is that that tradition of the Prophet where it said that Angels will not come into the house where there are dogs and where there are images hanging on walls, right? So, two things are made very clear. The images is the problem is not with the images, but the problem is with the images being displayed. As I said, Hazrat Aisha, that same cloth that the Prophet ripped off of the door, she cut it and made cushion covers out of it. And he had no problems with that. He had a problem with it being hung on display, right? So that is one thing we can understand. Another thing, as I said, this hadith in itself makes it clear. Dogs, and yet, you are permitted to have a dog, but outside the house as a guard dog, as a watchdog, right? But not inside your house. So there's nothing wrong with having a dog. The problem here is with having a dog inside the house, right? So there's nothing wrong with having a fabric that has images woven into it. But what is wrong is if you put it on display. So what are we trying to say here? We're trying to say that, okay, lifelike images or animate object images, paintings, pictures, sculptures, whatever it is, made of animate objects, put on display is what is not permitted, right? That is what is not accepted. That is that is a kind of the place where angels do not enter. Okay, so we make progress. Okay, now let's try to make some more progress here. We have understood from Sahih al-Muslim and Sahih al-Bukhari that it is very clear that the Prophet has talked about people making images of and statues, images and statues, right, of animate objects, right? That this is prohibited and the person will be punished. And when the person will in the day of resurrection, for each image that he has created, a soul will be born out of, and that soul will punish him, right? Now, but then again, when we try to understand the fatwa issued by the scholars, for example, we have Maliki, right? We have Maliki scholars and we have some of their predecessors, and then we have the Hanbali scholar, and we have Ibn Hamdan, right? Or is it Hamdan? Sorry. So, I mean, they maintained that actually drawing humans is permissible. Why? Again, because they base their opinion on the fact that prohibition is restricted to complete statues which imitate Allah's creation, right? And Ibn Abu Shaiba in his Musannaf, he reported this opinion from the venerated Tabi, right? I was trying to look for an English word for it, but okay. So a Tabi is a person who was born after the Prophet's death and who accompanied some of his companions, okay? So Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad is his name, who's, the person in question, okay? So he had said, because he was known to be the best scholar of his time, okay? Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad was known to be the best scholar of his time, and it is from him that Ibn Abu Shaiba, reports this opinion. And he says that there's the hadith that reads that Ibn On said, I entered upon Al-Qasim in his house, which was located in the upper part of Makkah, and saw a hajla. Now, a hajla is a net placed over a bed as a protection against flying insects, like how we have mosquito nets that are, like put over beds in many countries even today, right? So that hajla, that net, it had the images of a phoenix and a beaver. These are both animals. Again, phoenix is a bird, beaver, an animal. And Ibn Hajar declared the chain of transmission of this hadith authentic. Okay, so again, this is similar to the hadith that I also read, which I just quoted as well, about Hazrat Aisha, that she had hung over the door, she had hung this ornamental rug sort of a thing with images. It wasn't a rug really because it was made out of a woolen fabric, but let's just call it a rug for our sake. and then the prophet was just ripped it off and said, what is this? I mean, this is the worst thing you could have done, and that the person who makes images and who displays images, like this, they go to hell. Basically, who makes images, sorry. He said that the maker of images will go to hell. So this is like, why would you do this? And if you remember, as I said, that in the hadith that I read, she said that she didn't cut it up into pieces and made cushions out of them. Now, somehow, for some odd reason, I have heard Zakir Naik mention the same hadith of Hazrat pertaining to Hazrat Aisha, but he kind of mentioned it opposite. Now, I don't know if I read wrong, or somehow he seldom gets things wrong, but somehow he got this. He said that according to him, the tradition is that Hazrat Aisha made the cushions, and the prophet saw those cushions, the cushion covers, and he was like, what is this? And she's like, I made them for you to sit on. And he's like, remove it because this is prohibited. But again, the hadith that I actually read myself was the opposite. She had hung it on the door, and I've read it on various places, and in all the three places that I've read it, she hung it on the door, and he came and he ripped it off, and then she made cushion covers out of it. So I'm confused here, but anyway, let's move on, because now in his commentary on Sahih al-Muslim, Al-Nawawi said that some of the Salaf have mentioned, they have maintained that complete statues that are figures, as I've been mentioning since my previous podcast, figures that are three-dimensional, in other words, that cast a shadow, are prohibited. Otherwise, they're unrestrictedly permissible. And he went further, saying that the unrestricted permissibility of non-casting shadows photos is an invalid opinion. Okay, so then he says that Ibn Hajar, however, said in Fath al-Bari that the invalidity of this opinion is disputable. So again, the problem is that this is a controversial issue that has been debated, and many people have tried to make some sense out of it. But what they say is that at the end of the day, from what all the scholars have gathered, they understand that there is actually no objection to drawing animates such as humans, animals, and the like, whether from imagination, nature, or photographs. There is no objection in Islamic law to pursuing this talent, provided that these drawings are void of anything prohibited. Again, intention, the purpose behind it, and they do not incite sexual desires. So likewise, it is impermissible to paint or photograph nudity, or any part of the body that must be concealed. That religion, good morals, piety, and man's sound natural disposition commands us to cover, right? So here it is. So on one side, you have scholars that stick to the strict ruling, to stay on the safe side, and you understand them too. To stay on the safe side, because there are 3-4 traditions of the Prophet mentioning again and again imagery, But as I said, from what I understand, it's about displaying life-sized or lifelike images, right? Okay, but again, as I've said before, if this still doesn't, if it still doesn't sit well with you, please feel free to remove whatever it is that you feel can be controversial, right? Or do what many people do. They just, put all those things in one particular room or space, and and in a cupboard or in a display shelf or whatever, and nobody actually. It's that kind of a room where you don't pray, I guess. But again, if you want to completely just erase everything, just erase everything. Keep everything in a storage, cover them up, sell them, do whatever pleases you. But I personally, from all the understanding that I can get, keeping in mind how practical Islam is, I am quite sure that here too, basically what the Prophet was really talking about was making sculptures and images and portraits that can be used for idol worship, that can be very easily moved towards that category, right? Because remember, in pagan cultures, in pagan civilizations, people worshipped um, animate, animated objects. Okay, they worshipped pictures of their dead relatives. They worshipped animals they worshipped, But then again, one would argue, that at the same time in Islam, and in the Prophet's time, it was made very clear that this does not pertain to dolls. And dolls are literally 3D images of, lifelike, animate objects. I mean, what are dolls? Dolls are literally a sort of a mini creation, of humanoid forms, right? I mean, look at your Barbies, look at our, baby dolls. They're all lifelike and they're all 3D and they're literally, objects that you can hold onto. And they are a perfect portrayal of the human kind, isn't it? And then you have cars and you have other toys, you have birds, you have dogs, and all these are again, for identifying purposes for babies as well. You use them to help them identify each animal, for example, or to play with them. Or you have these railway station sets, you have again these farms or these villages or model villages, and we use Legos and we make up all these different cities, and we have people in those. And those people obviously are Lego people and they're not anywhere near life-sized or lifelike, but still what I'm trying to say is this too is a process of creation, right? This too is a process of creation. You are creating little worlds, and this is permissible in Islam. You've created dolls, and it's permissible because there were some friends of Hazrat Aisha who some girls, they were playing dolls when the Prophet came. Then they hid their dolls, and then the Prophet's like, what were you playing with? Come, let's play together. It doesn't matter. So you see, he had no problems with dolls. He could have easily said, oh no, these dolls, they're, 3D images, they're humanoid, they can. No. See, because this is exactly what makes me even more sure that the point here that the Prophet was trying to make was not about drawing anything or sketching anything or making portraits of anything or anyone. He was talking particularly about displaying images and statues on the walls or in such a way as, an idol worshiper would normally do in his own home. They displayed those statues, they displayed those lifelike images, they displayed those sketches and portraits. You see, because why else would these scholars make it very clear that, yeah, okay, taking photographs is permissible in Islam because you're literally making a copy. Now, see here, this is exactly what they're saying. They say that you are literally making a copy of someone that you're seeing. You're literally taking a copy image of that person, right? But then again, hang on, that's exactly what we're doing when we're making portraits of people too. We're making literal copies of those people. You see where I'm going with this, what I'm trying to say here? It depends on what you are drawing for. If you are making a statue, a life-sized statue, and you want to, for, display purposes and all, okay, that can be problematic. But if you're actually making a statue or a sculpture for a reason that maybe it should be kept in a museum so that it can highlight some part of history that the museum is trying to, keep a record of, that is something else. If you are, using, if you're displaying on your walls any particular carving or sculpture or bust or mask that has been used for religious purposes by pagan cultures, yes, don't do it. Don't display it. Okay? But if you're just displaying images, because again, here too, I would come up with this. In the ancient pagan cultures in the time of Hazrat Ibrahim, if you remember, the people worshipped the moon and the sun too. The moon and the sun are not animate objects. We are allowed to draw them. That is not the question here. The question, or the whole point or the debate here, is that we need to have the common sense to understand what the Prophet was trying to say. He was trying to say anything that can mimic, trigger, or allude to, or influence, or bring back that, that ancient pagan form of idol worshipping. Anything that can sort of mimic that or allude to that or go for that, in any form, should not is not permitted and should not be there. It shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be displayed. Okay, but if you are drawing something for for example, for the purpose of study, for the purpose of identification, for the purpose of record keeping, for the purpose of, for example, medicine, for the, when you're in the medical field, you have to draw the anatomy of the human being in order to study it, in order to identify it. That's completely different. It is the displaying of portraits. It is the displaying of these kind of images. It is the displaying of, that is the problem. Okay, that is the main problem. And drawing with that intent, or drawing in such a way that it could lead to or allude to or mimic or go for or, influence that idea or that thought, that is what is prohibited. Okay, in other words, art form and vanity. Okay, so when you're creating an art form and calling it art and putting it on display so that it should be glorified, that is prohibited. So it depends on why you're drawing what you're drawing. And it depends on why you're making what you're making. It depends on why you're carving what you're carving. Okay? But once you master the art of whatever it is that is needed in order to lay down the foundation for you, then obviously, as a Muslim artist, you would do better to sculpt something else other than human beings, for example. Similarly, in certain non-Muslim societies, even today, you will see how they put portraits of important people in their homes and all, and they sort of give reverence to them. That is also not allowed in Islam. You understand? That is one of those portraits, basically, that is not allowed. Again, displaying, hanging of portraits, hanging of such images of that is not allowed. But decoration pieces, little decoration pieces, little art of decor that have nothing to do whatsoever with any, such notion, there is no problem there. Okay? But again, if you have something that feels questionable to you, that now has begun to trigger a controversy in your mind, or it has begun to make you feel uneasy, just get rid of it. Because there's nothing more important than you having your own peace of mind. Again, as the Prophet said, if there's a conflict and there's a struggle between your heart and your mind, just listen to your heart. Okay? So if your heart is not at peace with it, just get rid of it. But I am trying to just make you understand that Islam is a very practical religion filled with common sense, and you would really do better to try to understand that a lot of the traditions of the Prophet literally have a context. They have a background, they have a meaning, they have a purpose, and it would always do us better to try to understand the meaning behind it, okay? Because he's made many things very, very clear. So dolls are permissible in Islam. He made that very clear. And yet, the very reason why we're trying to debate as to why drawing images and, making statues, again, see the difference here. Because dolls are made with the intent to play with. They are literally something that you're toying with, you're playing with. These are toys. But statues, when they're carved, when they're made, when they're put on display, and they are glorified for vanity's sake, for art's sake, for whatever sake, when you're glorifying them, that is the problem there. So anything that can lead, as I said, towards that inclination should be avoided. So yes, Muslim sculptors would do better to just sculpt any other inanimate object rather than making lifelike or life-sized images and sculptures of people or animals. It's as simple as that. Decoration pieces are just decoration pieces. That's also it. Now let's try to understand in terms of the Quran. How and why is it that many of the scholars have tried to explain that, not all drawings are haram, and, what is the whole debate about, right? So let's put it this way. If you understand Islam in the Quranic point of view, for example, the Quran does not say in any way, in any place or any way, that designing or creation of art is haram. No. Um, because remember that hadith where the Prophet says that, Allah, indeed Allah is beautiful and likes beauty. This line is so famous, obviously, that we tend to understand this line in so many different ways and in so many different levels. We talk about, we quote this hadith when we try to talk about grooming, self grooming, that you need to groom yourself, you need to, look clean and nice and beautiful, you need to look elegant, you need to look graceful, and you need to, don't be unkempt, in other words, right? So then we also refer to this line when we're talking about creation of art. We refer to this hadith when we talk about, about celebrating beauty, right? So the importance of beauty, in fact, is visible in different verses of the Quran. Like, for example, O children of Adam, put on your adornment on every occasion of prayer. Say, who has forbidden the adornment of Allah which He has brought forth for His servants and the good things of His provision? This is the 7th surah, and these are the verses 31 and 32. Okay. He's talking, God himself in the Quran is talking about putting on adornments on every occasion of prayer. Notice that you're going for prayer, and he's saying, just adorn yourself, for God's sake. He's like, say, who has forbidden the adornment of Allah which He has brought forth for His servants and the good things of His provision? In other words, God is saying that, ask those who have a problem with it, that who has forbidden the adornment of Allah, which He's given to His servants, which is given to His people, and He's provided, to them of all the good things. So creativity is considered God's blessing, when you refer to this verse of the Quran, right? But again, now the Quran is trying to make it very clear that there are certain types of art that, again, we're going back exactly to that point. There are certain types of art that the Quran that God does not like, and those are sculptures or figures made for the purpose of worship. You see, something that alludes to, made specifically for, blatantly for the sake of worship, or something that alludes to that form, or something that inclines you towards that side. These are the things that are not permissible, right? So in this instance, again, we can go back to Hazrat Ibrahim, right? The Prophet Ibrahim, when when he looked at his people who were worshipping, lifeless idols and all, and he's like, what are these images to which you keep on clinging? So there is that. And then, if you look at in another surah of the Quran, you know, again, the Quran talks about statues and sculptures in a positive form, you know. Um, for example, when the Quran talks about when the jinn built those pieces of art under the observation of Hazrat Suleiman, you know, that they built this is mentioned in the Quran, in the 34th surah, and I think this is the 13th verse. I hope I'm right here. And in the Quran it said that the jinns, they built for him as many temples as he wished, and figures, basins like cisterns, and cauldrons fixed in the ground. See, work of art by the jinns, you know, ordered by Hazrat Suleiman, the Prophet Solomon, peace be upon him. And the Quran talks about this, as something that is to be admired. The Quran mentions figures and basins like cisterns and cauldrons. You see, this is artwork. This tells you something. If the hadith, if the ahadith, the traditions, if they confuse you, refer to the Quran. So the Quran is talking about figures, and the Quran is talking about art, and it's talking about, sculptings. In a way, these are kind of sculptings, but they've sculpted cauldrons, you can say. They didn't sculpt human figures. They actually created a cauldron that was, fixed to the ground, and they made basins like cisterns, and then they made, figures, okay, and they made the temples, okay. So I guess you can understand here what God is trying to tell you, or what the prophet is trying to tell you, when they're talking about sculptures and figures. Because again, I would go back to the dolls. 3D, 3D form of art, humanoid form of art, dolls. you know in fact, those who again try to explain the clear distinction between halal and haram art, forms of art, they tend to cite Surah Al-Shurara, right? Sorry, I'm fumbling so badly because I'm half dead right now, but I need to finish this podcast and not make any mistakes. Sorry, this is Surah Al-Shuara, right? And this means poets, okay? This is the chapter of the Quran that is named poets. And over here in this surah, in Surah Al-Shuara, God has made it very clear what is forbidden and what is allowed in art. Okay. And here, obviously, God mentions poetry directly, and if you remember, poetry is a very popular form of art that has been continued from the Prophet's time onwards, even before the Prophet's time, but especially during his time onwards, it was never discouraged. And if any one of you have heard one of my earlier podcasts, I've talked about how rap was essentially an Islamic form of art, really. This is the Prophet and his companions and his acquaintances. They used to rap, especially during wars, So that typical form of rap that you see, where you have this to and forth, where you have you have one rapper saying his piece, and then you have the other rapper coming back with his piece, and they're sort of challenging each other through witty rhymes. Yes, that is exactly what was being done during the war times. The Prophet's companions and friends did that. So, in this surah, it is clearly said, as for the poets. By the way, this is the 26th surah, okay? This is the 26th chapter of the Quran, because I think I'm not pronouncing it properly. And it is, the verses are 224 to 7, okay? So 224 to 227, okay? And in this verse, it is said, as for the poets, only the perverse follow them. Have you not regarded that they rove in every valley, and that they say what they do not do? Barring those who have faith, do righteous deeds, and remember Allah much often, and vindicate themselves after they've been wronged, and the wrongdoers will soon know at what goal they'll end up. So here, basically, God is making it very clear that only perverse people would follow and admire poets. And in describing the poets, it's mentioned that they rove in every valley, meaning that they make up things from their imagination. But at the time of the Prophet, most poetries were about beauty of women, adultery, and pervert behaviors, basically. So that is what is being referred to. right? But Allah does not forbid poetry completely. As I said, He makes the exception of faithful poets, in the next verse. So those who use their art as a tool to defend justice, to reveal oppression and injustice. So it's not poetry, it's what you're saying in your poetry. That's what matters. That is what makes it halal or haram. This is the same for forms of art. The intention with which you're making art, what your purpose is, what the meaning is behind it, that is what is important. What you're creating, whatever it is that you're creating for. So, from these verses, you can understand that any form of art is halal as long as it has a halal meaning to it or a halal purpose to it, right? And it is considered haram if it is made with, a purpose that contradicts Islam, okay, or the teachings of Islam, basically. Okay, so this is what you need to distinguish when it comes to Islam. This is why I keep on saying that you need to talk about, you need to consider, and we need to talk about common sense when it comes to these things. You need to try to understand what exactly is being said, right? But again, I would say it again, if you're still confused, if you still feel that no, there is, you still feel dodgy, you still feel that okay, no, again, just get rid of it, okay? Remove it for your own sake. But Islam is all about common sense, okay? I will always continue to do um, more and more research as much as I can. But again, the this is why the fatwa that was issued by the scholars, by the Muslim scholars in general, most of them, was that there is no harm at all in sculpture, photography, and drawings of living beings, whether or not they have a soul, although it is permissible. Also, it is permissible to sell, buy, or keep pictures and statues. There's no objection to showing them. Now, some have gone as far as to say there's no objection to showing them as exhibition as well, but this I disagree with, because this objection has been made very clearly. The objection to exhibiting them or displaying them in such a way that can allude to, glorify, incite, invoke, incline towards the pagan culture of idol worship, that is not allowed. So this which they're saying that there is no objection to showing them in an exhibition as well, they're talking about an actual exhibition, which I said earlier, museums and the like, where you're sort of archiving, where the whole purpose of making those sculptures and exhibiting them is for, for the sake of, maybe portraying history, or for the sake of exhibiting a certain form of art or whatever it is. But it has, again, a particular purpose. It could be in a museum, it could be in an art exhibition, it could be something, whatever it is. But no, displaying such things at home like that, hanging them on the walls, that is understood that for animate objects, it's not permissible, right? So it depends. Again, it depends on what form it is in, where it's kept, what you're planning to do with it, how it's showcased. All these things also come into play. The rest I leave really to you. Do whatever makes you feel most comfortable. But as I said, I myself, although I am trying to make a positive advocation of it, but to be honest, I myself do not display any such things on my walls. Generally, in our house, we do not display sculptures. We don't have sculptures. We don't display animated forms of lifelike images or imageries or portraits. We kind of don't have them anyway. The things that we do have are those, traditional arty-farty sort of handicraft sort of things, which are made out of wood carvings and all. And most of them are inanimate, come to think of it. Some of them could be considered controversial, but they are again displayed in a place where normally one wouldn't pray. And if one does want to pray, then those things are removed. Yeah, they're actually literally removed from the wall when one wants to pray in that particular room. So who knows, maybe one day we'll completely remove them too. It's really, again, I think Islam is all about common sense. God is all about common sense. Islam has again and again said, intentions. What are your intentions? What is your purpose? That is what we're going to look into. So here we are. This is me trying to make as much sense of it for you as possible, keeping in mind what little knowledge I do have of our religion. Allah knows best. This is me signing out. Khuda Hafiz.